Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tigers Down Under football flashbacks, or the decade that was the 2010s. I'm your host, as always, Alex, and with me I have Logan. How are you, Logan?
Evening, Alex. Yeah, I'm doing well. It's good to see you, and obviously we find ourselves in the midst of another lockdown, so interesting times. But at least there's been a lot of football to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to excuse the scruffy appearance on my end. It is sort of the result of the lockdown. It's the longer, rough hair and the beard starting to grow out as well. Where it's funny, we signed off for the season sort of wishing everyone in England well, because they were sort of going through another wave, or they were going through a few issues of their own, and we were seemingly sitting here pretty high and dry in Australia, but it's all sort of flipped on its head at the moment, especially in New South Wales. So it's going to be very interesting next month or so, I suspect. But look, we've had a lot of football to watch in the meantime, and then the new season's certainly around the corner as well. But look, we're here today to do another episode of our flashback series. So we haven't done one of these in a while. We thought this would be a good sort of precursor to the season resuming, and Euros are over now. It gives everyone something to think about or talk about whilst we're waiting for the real stuff to begin again. So I will bring up our slides for today, and it is the Barmby Army. So it's the 2010s. It was the era where Nick Barmby was the manager, or the I guess you'd say he was caretaker for a while. I think he did become the official manager as the season wore on of the side after Nigel Pearson left to go back to managing Leicester. What are your sort of overriding memories of that second half of that season?
Yeah, I think the overriding memory still to me was I think we spoke about it last time, was the contentious time period where Nigel Pearson kind of was questioned about whether he was leaving, denied it, and it was a very abrupt departure. And so was kind of left in, I guess the future or immediate future with City was left up in the air. And then, the news came through that Barmby was taking over, which I think, being a fan favourite, kind of filled us with a lot of optimism and hope. But I do remember that it was interesting because I think he had to kind of deregister as a player, which was kind of one of those, I can imagine, for someone like Nick Barmby, who, was, with all due respect, was certainly at the tail end of his career, to have a really quick shift and have to morph into a manager role, which he certainly hadn't done, and much less among his peers as well and teammates. So it was extremely interesting. But then obviously when he spearheaded the victory over Nigel Pearson, it was a very, very important grudge match, and just the manner that it came with it was a very late winner from Robert Corrin, I believe. Fantastic way. But I know that we fizzled towards the end of the season, but that game still stands out as one of the better City fixtures that I think I've seen in my time being a City fan.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting seeing how good, how well Leicester are travelling now, and just remembering back to this era, just about exactly 10 years ago now, where things were very different, and there was a real grudge between Leicester and Hull. I mean, the Allams didn't want to sell Leicester any of our players. There was all that talk about Cameron Stewart going there, and they wouldn't accept £1 million just for his left foot, or however the quote goes. But with Pearson coming here and then Pearson going back, and everything else that went with it, it was certainly a bit of a rivalry there for a little while. Certainly with Leicester. I'm, of course, wearing the Barmby Army shirts that were a very limited run of shirts from that season, which was quite remarkable that there was such a groundswell of support behind a player manager at the time. I guess it's still quite a unique feature in football. I think it was our first player manager since Warren Joyce. And I know you're talking about him sort of deregistering as a player, but I know, at least from my end, there was still some hope that he'd maybe play a game or two as the player manager. But essentially, I mean, look, in hindsight, it was basically accepting that job was him accepting his career as a player was over, which was a pretty remarkable career for him as a player. So a bit of a sad way for it to end for him.
Yeah, it certainly was. And I think that, the fact that he had, as I said before, had such a firm affiliation with the fans, it was one of those bittersweet moments where there was an excitement about him stepping into the manager role because you knew that he cared. And I mean, I guess you can even look at the dust up that he had with Jimmy Bullard, and there's so many moments what kind of really endeared himself to the whole faithful. So yeah, losing him as a player was one thing, but getting him as a manager still was kind of you were sort of unsure about how you felt about it, but it was kind of a very heartwarming tale, I guess, if you will. A question that I had for you, Alex, and I don't know if this is out of line, but I remember how vicious that grudge match with Nigel Pearson was, and it felt so important to get one over him. When I kind of reflect now, how do you feel about Nigel Pearson? Do you still kind of hold any form of level of resentment towards him, or is it kind of water under the bridge quite quickly?
Yeah, I guess it's water under the bridge. I mean, I think he's at Bristol City now, I think. So in technically speaking, we have sort of a return of Nigel Pearson to the KCOM, or what's it called these days now? It's the MK something. Whatever, I forget what the new name is already. I'm sure I remember it soon enough. But we got Nigel Pearson returning to Hull for a match this season, and I don't necessarily look at that as something I've got penciled in the diary or anything like that. I think he was a manager who was very dour and very stern with the media and with the supporters when they criticised his style of play or things like that. So I think it was easy to rub the supporters the wrong way, I guess. So when he left, he was very easy to paint as the villain. But yeah, look, I think the success that we achieved the following season with Bruce, I think just means that it's very much water under the bridge, and I don't think there's too much resentment or anything like that towards Pearson at this stage, especially. I mean, for me, it's almost the more frustrating element with Pearson was a couple of seasons later in the Premier League when his Leicester went on the run that essentially relegated us under Bruce. So that was probably the more painful point.
Yeah, that's right. The Great Escape. And I think it's scary doing this flashback show now and thinking that it's, we're in 2021. We're talking about a game a decade ago. Yeah,
no, exactly. It's time flies, and that's exactly why we've decided to do this series, because it's just remarkable that, I've got such clear memories of a lot of these games and a lot of these periods of time, and it's a bit crazy to think just quite how long ago they were.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but we'll move on. So that was sort of the context around the season. We'll look at some of the players who came into the club and left the club at the time. And at the time, there was not too many departures in that January. I mean, we lost Martin Pusic, the sort of well-known, inverted commas, Austrian that I think we had on the books for a while. There was a couple of those sort of foreign players, and to this day, there's still those sorts of more obscure foreign players that float around the club, play a couple of games and then get released. And he was certainly one of those. But then we also had Paul McShane going out on loan to Palace. And this was sort of that period of his career at City where he was probably a bit maligned by the supporters. He hadn't really settled in all that well. But it's sort of the start of this remarkable series of loan spells that he had before coming right back into the fold under Bruce and really doing quite well.
And I think that's what's so difficult about doing this flashback show is thinking, what we know happened in the following years. It's hard to actually reflect on this particular moment, because when you think about Paul McShane, it's baffling to think at this period in time he was being passed around on loan spells. We had the likes of Jack Hobbs, who was really the central figure, which we talked about in the last episode. We also had Alex Bruce was floating around or about to float around.
I think he came in with Steve Bruce. Yeah.
And so Paul McShane was, quickly found himself on the outer, and as you said, went on a bit of a milk run as far as playing for various clubs, and then. Knowing what we know now is there was the very famous period with the Don't Sell McShane era, where the chant got started where there was going to be a riot, or you'd have a riot on your hands if McShane was sold. And he was just an incredibly class figure in the City lineup. But yeah, that certainly wasn't always the case. And it's fascinating to see just how good and how promising his City career was. And I guess as we reflect on it and think about how many fond memories he provided us with, and I guess arguably his greatest moment was the goal in the game to get us up against Cardiff. But it was just it's a remarkable that he didn't always settle in at City.
Yeah, and it's one of those players where you almost think it's just remarkable that he was still at the club, that You tend to see these sorts of players get loaned out time and time again, and then one of those loan spells goes well and they get sold. It's so rare that player then actually comes back to the parent club and actually then has quite a successful end of his career at that club.
And let's not forget that also, like, we're talking about Paul McShane at this period of time was in the championship. His fondest memories for City were, not only getting us promoted, but I do believe that under Bruce in the Premier League, he was part of the back three when we played that system. It was Curtis Davies, Paul McShane, and Alex Bruce were quite often or regularly our back three. And I think that speaks volumes as far as the confidence that Steve Bruce held in him, and for him to not only keep his spot but also to be able to perform in the top flight really just speaks to the heights that he really did reach in his career.
Definitely. And look, also pictured, we've got Cameron Stewart. We did talk already about that sort of transfer saga with Leicester, and it is a real shame sort of reflecting on Cameron Stewart, who I think is now well out of football. I think he's currently employed doing something else, but it's just such a shame when you look at players like that with the level of talent that he had and the way that he played for us, particularly in that season, to the extent that Leicester wanted to shell out £1 million for him, which at the time was a pretty significant fee for a championship player. It's just such a shame that it was one of those instances. I don't know if his head maybe got turned in the transfer saga and then everything kind of fell apart, or they weren't really related to each other, but it seemed to go quite downhill for him from that point on, which is quite a shame.
Well, Alex, if you'll remember these dark days in I guess in Australian fandom of supporting City, where we were forced to listen to a lot of these games on radio. That was the only access that we had. But obviously, if you subscribe to the website, you get the Tigers player, and the highlights packages would come out about 2 days after the game. And just my fondest memories were just seeing highlights packages of Cameron Stewart just cutting defenders apart. And there was almost like highlights packages that were pretty much 5 or 6 of his, blistering runs. And it was fascinating to just go, we had an incredible player on our hands. And he was such a showpiece and was so highly regarded. But you spoke, we've spoken before about the I think you mentioned it with Steve Bruce making comments about how, as you said, when he was a questionable player, as to £1 million wouldn't buy his left peg or whatever it was. But I also remember he's also part Scottish or had some other heritage.
Northern Irish or something, maybe?
Yeah, but there was some contention as to whether he should, declare himself as far as who would represent, whether he pledged his allegiance to England or whatever that other country was. And I remember that he was advised at the time to bank on representing England, that don't sell yourself short type thing. And that's an incredible line of thinking when we consider where his career ended up, and it just kind of alludes to the promise that he did show, and I guess the plaudits that he was receiving.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's it's a shame, as we said before, it's a shame that the career didn't work out for him, but he was certainly central that January to transfer dealings. There's a couple of familiar players that came into the club as well on loan. We got in Josh King from Manchester United and Vito Mannone from Arsenal, both players that have gone on to play quite a bit of time in the Premier League. Josh King still there now with Watford, having previous spells at Everton and Bournemouth, and Mannone with Arsenal and then Sunderland. Two players. I thought Mannone, when he came in on loan for us, was actually quite good from memory. He was one of those lone keepers that we sort of rotated through, but compared to Galashki, for instance, he seemed to have a much better time of it with us. And weirdly enough, it was the opposite with Josh King. I don't have any strong memories of him playing particularly well for us, and he's gone on to do fantastic things elsewhere.
Yeah, I think the promise that I remember with Josh King was he was incredibly fast. I don't think he was afforded as much minutes as perhaps we expected. I do remember him being more of a role player than a kind of a lock. But yeah, like you said, he really flourished. Like, the attributes were always there. I remember him being spoken about as being fast and a big presence with a lot of power. And he certainly showed that and showed it in glimpses. But yeah, to see where he ended up, obviously the differing to Cameron Stewart when he came with such high praise. He probably went on and proved that a little bit more and had I guess, a closer career to what was expected of him. And I agree. Vito Minone himself was a fantastic keeper for us. And I remember the confidence. He was an incredibly loud keeper. Like I remember watching him a few times over at the games and just hearing him scream. He was very animated. And he's certainly, as you said, when you compare him to some of the other lone keepers that we did bring in, he's certainly one of the more prominent ones that I have far fonder memories of.
A fun memory on Facebook popped up the other day of myself and an Arsenal supporting friend from 2012, it must have been, where I was sort of trying to make the case that Minone was actually a keeper that should have a future at Arsenal. And at the time, my friend was sort of suggesting that this new keeper that they'd brought in, Martinez, might be a better prospect for them. And at the time, I'd never really heard of this kid. And obviously, the context being now seeing Martinez at Villa, having had a short stint at Arsenal towards the end of his time at that club. It was just funny sort of seeing that. I mean, that's probably more of a story about Martinez and his time at Arsenal, but it was funny sort of seeing that, the trajectory that these keepers can go on, that Minone, as a promising young keeper at Arsenal, didn't get that chance and has sort of fallen off into the wilderness. I'm not actually quite sure where he's ended up these days, but I mean, he's probably most well known for his spell with Sunderland in the Premier League. But bit of a shame for him as well. Well, look, we'll also talk about the games from the season. You've sort of already touched on that Leicester game against Pearson as being one of the big ones. And the player pictured there as well as a significant departure at the end of the season was Garcia, who played his final game at the end of that season against West Ham, which I think we lost 2-1, where I think he was denied an offside goal, which would have been a great send-off for him. But look, there was quite a few decent games that season, and we sort of touched on before that the fact that we went on that quite a good run of games under Barmby. I think it was 11 undefeated from January to March, which, you have to think. I mean, we were sort of building quite a good squad over that season and the season before from the Allams investment, and we're playing reasonably attractive football under Barmby. We were starting to dare to dream that we could actually finish in the playoffs. And I think we sort of flirted with the playoff places in that March period, but then sort of lost 5 games in a row and it all fell apart. So, I mean, look, I guess my sort of memory of that time was going into January, and it's sort of a familiar story in recent years as well, going into January with that sort of sense of optimism, and then not a whole lot of investment being made in January to strengthen the squad. And everything just sort of running out of steam in the second half of the season. But look, we certainly started quite strongly under Barmby. That 2-0 win against Derby on his first game in charge, and then beating Leicester 2-1 against Pearson to get revenge as well, were two probably the most memorable wins that I have from that section of the season. But what were your thoughts on the games and how we finished that season? I mean, we've sort of touched on it already.
Yeah, I guess going back now and looking at the results is kind of triggering my memory. But we had that horrible period in March, I think, that really kind of set us out of contention. But before that, I think it was something like 5 losses in a row in March. But before that, I always remember that season as being like when you go back into the championship and you feel like you're kind of starting to lose hope. You see the squad rebuild. I remember being surprised at the prospect of how we may be getting promoted again, and only through the vehicle of the playoffs. But I certainly didn't feel like it was a bridge too far until we had that really dull period. It was kind of frustrating because I remember kind of sitting around 7th and 8th and just snapping at the heels, and you would win a couple of games and put yourself right back in the mix, and then you would lose those games that were kind of you're expecting to win or hopeful that you would win, I suspect. And then we went on a pretty good run right at the end, but it was kind of a bridge too far. But I guess the thing that we haven't really talked about here is still just how prolific Matty Fryatt was. Like that. I was
just going to touch on that. Yeah, I was just having a look at his.
Just going back and seeing the role that he played, I do remember like it almost felt like if we played Matty Fryatt was almost averaging a goal a game, or if we were going to score, he seemed the most likely. Obviously, Corin chipped in quite a lot, and I remember he got quite renowned for scoring late. Because I do remember a run of City shirts that you could buy from the Tigers Leisure, which was keep calm and pass to Corin.
Yeah.
And I actually remember looking at a photo of me wearing that when I was, 10 years younger, looking a lot more fresh than my weathered self these days. But it just, the fond memories of, of being a competitive side. And I guess that excitement of the championship was, you really didn't know what you were going to get with this team. There wasn't a huge kind of, a dose of class, but at the same time, we were competitive. And I think that, that's what kept watching and listening to games at that stage, so exciting for us.
Yeah, and look, and I think it's a really apt time for us to be doing this episode, because I would like to think that this coming season is going to be very much a similar sort of vibe, where this was a team that had essentially come from the brink of relegation to the championship. And granted, this 21-22 team has just come from League One, but they're both sides that have started to be built and be gelled together, and younger players coming together and really starting to get some good synergies in the team. Whereas you say, we've been so used to, or at the time we'd been so used to that poor season in the Premier League, then the poor season in the Championship, and what that would then mean for the side. To suddenly actually have hope that we could actually get back up to the Premier League, and yes, we ultimately finished 8th. But the following season showed just how close we were to unlocking that potential. It was a really exciting end to the season, and really sort of filled the supporters with hope again. It wasn't so much about looking down the table at what could lie below us, but actually start to look back up the table and start to have a bit more ambition. So, look, it was I think this half of the season was really that impetus that showed us that, as you said, we had Corrin and Fright scoring goals and firing on all cylinders. And it was a real shame, really, that Fright, from memory, was injured for most of the following season, if I'm not wrong. And that's why we ended up having Jay Simpson and Sonny Aluko as the main options for most of that season. But it just showed the potential in the squad and a lot of the opportunity that we would have, that we would then show the following season.
Yeah, certainly. And in looking back at the playing roster that we had as well, there's still players like Liam Rosinia and James Chester.
Yep.
Some incredible players that we did have on the books that were probably at the beginning of their career, not Rosinia so much, but certainly James Chester. But, we got to see I guess the birth of a really promising young side.
Robbie Brady as well.
Robbie Brady as well. So there were some incredibly good signings. And we did talk last podcast now about the relationship that we did have with the Manchester United reserves team. To a point where I do remember a mock-up of the Hull City logo being made as a Manchester United reserves team as well. But there's some really astute signings, and as you said, we know, looking back at this historically, how important this season was in the 5-year plan, or the longer term plan that we did have at City, and we did go on to far more promising things. But it's just such an interesting season. Thomas Canny as well. We look at him and what he's moved on to be, and this was the origins of his first experience with top flight football.
Yeah, certainly. And then look, it's interesting, sort of with the sliding doors. We've got this man pictured as Richard Garcia being the player that was so involved in the 2008 promotion push. And I mean, aside from McShane, he was probably one of the last ones to leave from that kind of core group. Barmby, of course, going into management and therefore moving out of the playing roster. But it was sort of that sliding doors where it was almost the end of the old guard. And the sort of rejuvenation of the squad that had happened that season and then continued the following season was really what then brought about our next promotion to the Premier League. So in that sense, and I mean, look, it's also interesting just to think that it's one of the few seasons from the decade where, it was stability in the sense that the season prior we'd played in the Championship and the season following we played in the Championship. There weren't many seasons that decade where we either hadn't just suffered a relegation from the Premier League, or we weren't just about to be promoted to the Premier League. So having that stability of being able to turn over the squad in a sort of a reasoned, balanced sort of way, and not having to chop and change too much as well was interesting to see. And the building blocks were there for that promotion push the following season.
Yeah, and probably an exciting period as well. Going back and looking at some of the score lines as well on this season, I know that one of the biggest criticisms that we did have of Steve Bruce in the following seasons, or that did come about, was we got so tired of seeing the boring 1-0 score lines, and there was a real I guess resilience or resoluteness to the way he set up his team, and it didn't always translate to attacking flair in the form of football. But just looking at these, there's some incredible blowout scores as well. There are lots of goals scored for, and then many goals scored against as well. I mean, there is a period of 1-0s as well, but there was such an unpredictability about this side that did make it exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, it's been a nice trip down memory lane to that season, and I think the following couple of seasons will certainly be interesting to revisit as well with the Steve Bruce era, and I guess it's sort of the more mainstream era, I guess, of City from the last decade. I guess there's a lot of focus and awareness around the Steve Bruce era, with a lot of good memories as well, with the the FA Cup final, the jaunt into Europe, and everything else that came with it. So look, we've got all that to look forward to as well. But look, thank you for joining me for this one, Logan.
My pleasure. It made me feel extremely old.
Yeah, no, exactly. That realization that this Nick Barmby era was just about 10 years ago is certainly eye-opening, and makes me feel pretty old as well. But look, it was a good way to get through a bit of time in lockdown, and hopefully for everyone over in the UK, it's a good way to recover from the disappointing defeat of England in the Euros final, and something that we can sink our teeth into as we look forward to the coming season for City as well. So, yeah. Sorry, were you going to say something?
No, it's just it was on a side note. It was, I know that we sometimes romanticize too much about the former City players, but it was exciting to see Harry Maguire play the way that he did in the Euros as well, and obviously he even found himself in the team of the tournament as well. So I guess a very friendly and kind shout out to him. It was great to see him, and it probably speaks to the history of the club and some of the quality that City have produced in recent years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And he broke the camera in the goal for his penalty, which was good to see as well. It's a good effort from him as well. But yeah, no, look, it was a great episode. I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to this. It was available for the first week on our Patreon, so that is we are going to try and keep that running for this season. So we do encourage, if you are able to join our Patreon and support us in any way possible, that would be much appreciated. It would all go towards the streaming and the production of these episodes. So means a lot to us. But look, if you're just listening on Spotify or watching on YouTube, if you can leave us a thumbs up or a comment, give us your thoughts. What did this season mean to you? What did Nick Barmby's reign as City manager mean to you? Did you think that brighter things were to come with promotion? Did you think we were just sort of stuck in the Championship with that sort of management, or whatever your thoughts were? We're always welcome to hear from you guys.
What did we miss? I'm sure there's some really crucial moments in this year as well that we
What moments have we forgotten to talk about? Absolutely, let us know as well. But look, until next time, come on, City.